Have you ever been in one of those meetings, the one where the security team, the finance department, and the board are all using the word risk, but it's super clear they're talking about completely different things? Well, today, we're going to cut right through all that confusion. We're going to build a common language for cyber risk, because, let's be honest, getting the words right is the very first step to building a defense that actually works.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get on the same page by establishing a shared vocabulary. Then we're going to break down what a cyber risk really is. After that, we'll get practical and talk about how you actually measure it. We'll walk through the whole management journey from start to finish. And finally, we'll see how all these pieces click together to create one unified defense.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, the language of cyber risk. Now, you might think the biggest threat in cybersecurity is some genius hacker in a dark room, but honestly, the real problem is often way simpler. It's a communication breakdown. It's a lack of a common language.
I mean, really think about that. If your security team's idea of risk is totally different from what the board of directors thinks it is, how on earth are you supposed to agree on a strategy, let alone a budget, right? This is where the confusion starts, and it's exactly where an effective defense can start to fall apart.
So, building this shared vocabulary, it isn't just a nice to have. It's the absolute foundation of a solid cyber risk strategy. It makes sure that when one person says risk, everybody else in the room pictures the same thing and is working towards the same goal.
Okay, so now we know why we need a common language. Let's define the most important word of all, risk. And it's not just some vague, scary cloud hanging over us. It's something we can actually break down into 3 core components.
First up, we've got vulnerability. Just think of this as a gap in your armor. It's an internal weakness. It could be a server you totally forgot to patch, a company policy that's kind of confusing, or that one employee who just clicks on everything in their email. Finding these is step 1.
Next, you have the threat. This is the force that could take advantage of that vulnerability. So if your unpatched server is the gap in your armor, the threat is the hacker who's out there actively scanning for that exact weakness. But hey, it's not always malicious. A threat could also be a well-meaning employee who accidentally deletes a critical file. And finally, there's impact. This is the so what part of the whole equation. If that hacker, the threat, gets through your unpatched server, the vulnerability, what's the damage? Do you lose customer data? Does your whole factory grind to a halt? Understanding the potential impact is how we figure out what to worry about first.
And this is where it gets really interesting, seeing how these pieces play together. A threat with no vulnerability is like a thief who can't find a way in. Frustrating for them, but not really your problem. And a vulnerability with no threat is like an unlocked door in a neighborhood where nothing bad ever happens. It's only when they start to combine that we see a real problem forming.
And that right there brings us to the single most important takeaway from this section. A true, manageable cyber risk only exists right here, in the middle, where all 3 of those circles overlap. You need a threat, exploiting a vulnerability, to cause a significant impact. This little intersection is where we need to focus all our energy and resources.
So we can define a risk. Awesome. But how do we measure it? How do we decide which risks are worth $1 million fix and which ones we can kind of live with? This is where the rubber meets the road, where we turn these ideas into a strategy you can actually budget for.
To get a grip on the money side of things, we use a simple but really powerful formula. First, you figure out the single loss expectancy, or SLE. Let's say a specific server gets hit with ransomware and it costs you $100,000 to fix everything. That's your SLE. Next, the annual rate of occurrence, or ARO. How often do we think this might happen? Maybe once every 2 years, so the ARO is 0.5. You just multiply those together, $100,000 times 0.5 gives you an annual loss expectancy, or ALE, of $50,000. And just like that, you've got a hard number you can take to the board.
Now, this brings us to 2 terms people mix up all the time: appetite and tolerance. Let's use an analogy. Think of it like a cross-country road trip. Your risk appetite is the big, strategic choice to drive from New York to LA to achieve your goal. You're willing to accept the risks that come with a long trip. Your risk tolerance, on the other hand, is the specific rule. You will not go more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. If you do, you have to act. You slow down. One is the mission, the other is the boundary.
Okay, so we can define risk and we can measure it. Now what we actually do. This brings us to the risk management journey. It's a continuous process that takes something that feels big and scary and turns it into a managed, monitored part of the business.
This path just makes sense when you walk through it. You always start with inherent risk. That's the raw danger before you've done anything at all. Then you put in your safeguards and controls, your firewalls, your training programs, all that good stuff. What's left over is your actual risk. From there, you build a formal risk treatment plan, and that little bit of risk that's left over at the very end, that's what we call residual risk.
And here's the thing a lot of people miss. Just having a plan doesn't make the risk magically disappear. That leftover residual risk, that's what you are consciously deciding to accept and live with. And your job isn't done. You have to constantly monitor it to make sure it doesn't grow and sneak outside the tolerance levels you've set. It's a cycle, right? You never really finish.
And that brings us to our final section, where we tie all of this together. The language, the components, the measurements, the management, it all leads to this. The ultimate goal isn't just to check off some boxes, it's to build a defense that is truly unified.
You know, there's a line from the source material that just nails it. It says, this shared understanding is more than just a technical necessity, it's a strategic advantage. And that's exactly right. When everyone from the server room to the boardroom is using the same playbook for risk, the whole organization can assess, prioritize, and act as one. That's a huge advantage.
So, we did it. We covered the vocabulary, we broke down the components, and we walked the management journey. The real question is, what's next for you? How are you going to use this language? Think about it. What's the first conversation you can have tomorrow at your organization to start building a stronger, more unified defense?